Welcome back to a very busy day on Velshi and Rule. Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson is facing backlash today after these comments about vaccines.
I have met very sincere, very smart people on both sides of the vaccine issue. I understand that infectious diseases are no small deal, but I have to say, I know as a mother, if you're telling me that I have to put a needle in the arm of my baby, and I don't feel good about what's in that needle, I'm not sure about that.
Williamson issued a statement earlier today, quote, "I'm sorry that I made comments which sounded as though I questioned the validity of life-saving vaccines. That's not my feeling, and I realize I misspoke." Joining us now, Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Let's clear this up. What's your view here? Do you think vaccines are safe or dangerous?
Well, I think they're important, and in many cases, they're life-saving. There's no doubt about that. But I also think that the era of a blind faith in Big Pharma is over, and the cozy relationship between Big Pharma and the CDC has simply got to stop.
And what does that have to do with should the government mandate vaccines for our children?
Once the American people feel absolutely safe about this, and that's why, as president, one of the things I would do is have a commission of scientists who we know are not paid for by Big Pharma, so that the American people can feel safe about it. Every American wants their child to be safe, and in many cases, the idea of a vaccination. I mean, I had the polio vaccine as a child. No, I'm certainly not doubting that. Most people I know are not. But I do not think that just the fact that you're concerned about Big Pharma's cozy relationship and the revolving door with the CDC and the FDA means that you're anti-science or even that you are anti-vaccine. And I don't think that that questioning should be shut down.
So without being president and being able to put that commission in place, as a private citizen who's running for president,
right,
should vaccines be mandated by the government?
In certain situations, I think they should. When there is an absolute, risk of public safety, I think there's always a balance.
Which is what we're going through right now, right? We had measles outbreaks.
Right, and so there are times, such as this, when public safety, I think you always have to balance public safety. This is true with national security as well, and individual freedom. And public safety, of course, has to come first.
Let's talk about thoughtfulness and compassion. The last time you and I spoke, you shared the importance of it. And we know in terms of society and culture and business how important it is.
Yes.
But when you think about government, how can you make that, or how can you take that to be your core agenda joining the White House when we know a guy like Mitch McConnell, who jokes about being called the Grim Reaper, is a guy who thoroughly understands how the government works, and compassion is important, but it's not a policy.
I'm a tough woman, Stephanie.
Love
can be fierce. So we know what happens when a well-intentioned Democratic president puts the olive branch out to Mitch McConnell, and then Mitch McConnell chews it up and spits it out and throws it in his face.
Because he knows policy.
That's right. But so did Barack Obama. I would not be timid with the use of executive power, and I don't think that I would be exploited, abused, or taken advantage of by Mitch McConnell, because I believe that love is why we're here on this earth.
Stephanie shares that view a lot. Let me ask you about another comment that you made that's gaining some attention. You said that President Trump's plans for mass ICE raids is no different from what the Nazis did. I want to play, you did provide an explanation of that, so let's just listen to that together.
Some people would say, well, Marianne, that's a false analogy, because yes, they might be a mass arrest, and yes, there might be mass deportation, but they're not being sent to the gas chambers. That is true. However, when we really allow ourselves to consider where they are going, to some of them, they will be returned to almost certain violence and deep injustice.
So it's always fraught with issues when the Holocaust is brought up, or concentration camps are brought up. Do you, and I understand the point that you were trying to make, you made it quite clearly, but do you think it's fair to make that comparison?
Well,
into the organized death that the Holocaust was?
No, I'm a Jew. And what I was talking about was the mass arrests themselves, was the fact, as President Trump has said, they're coming. There are going to be these mass raids. There are going to be these mass arrests. That is what happened in Nazi Germany. Now, I'm not the one. Another lawmaker has called those concentration camps. That was not my comment. What my comment was with those kinds of raids, mass raids and arrests, That is what happened in Nazi Germany, absolutely. And the fear that people must be experiencing right now. And you know, I remember visiting the Anne Frank house. I remember, we all know the stories of people who put Jews in their basements. I'm sure that all over America right now, people are talking about, well, you know, you're from Honduras or El Salvador, or you're from Guatemala, you know, wondering about where to hide people. Think what's happening right now. This is America. There are humane and compassionate and thoughtful ways to have appropriate boundaries and appropriate security policy.
And what do you say to those Americans who say that there are fellow Americans who are living below the poverty line and they're not being treated with compassion? And it's not that they're anti-immigrant, but they're saying time to put Americans first who are suffering as well. What do you say to those who make that argument?
I have no argument. It's not about first or second. It's not like people who don't want to help the immigrants are then helping the children here. A pillar of my campaign is the millions of American children who live in chronic trauma, going to classrooms where there aren't even the adequate school supplies to teach a child to read. The fact that if a child cannot read by the age of 8, chances of high school graduation are drastically reduced and chances of incarceration increased. Those are the silent emergencies. And I'm saying on the campaign all the time, the children at the border, which is in no way to minimize that horror, those are the screaming emergencies, but there are also the silent emergencies.
How do we pay for it?
Oh, Stephanie, I'll tell you how you pay for it, and you know how we pay for it. First of all, we repealed that ridiculous $2 trillion tax cut that gave 83 cents of every dollar to the very richest individuals and corporations. We stopped with the corporate subsidies, such as $26 billion to the fossil fuel companies.
And what happens when those companies say, okay, I got it, we're going to take our business overseas?
First of all, they take their business. That's simply not the way it happens. Also, we have the United States unable to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies. And while I do believe that our military budget should absolutely reflect our military needs for national security, I think every American needs to wake up to the shenanigans of the military-industrial complex and how much hundreds of billions of dollars are spent only because of short-term profit maximization for military defense contractors as opposed to America's legitimate security needs. That's a lot of cash you have on hand when you stop playing those games.